Hi, my name is Lucille Hargrove. I'm 75 years old, and this is my story. It's a story I never thought I'd have to tell. A story not just of age and family, but of dignity, betrayal, and the quiet kind of revenge only a woman who's lived long enough can understand how to serve. You see, when people think of old age, they think of fragility, soft voices, knitting needles, empty porches, but they forget what we've survived, what we've endured. They forget that we remember everything. And sometimes, remembering is the sharpest weapon of all. It all began, unsurprisingly, at Christmas. Now, Christmas used to mean something sacred to me. In our home here in Shreveport, Louisiana, I had always been the one who brought everyone together. My sons, their wives, their kids. I'd pull out the old cedar wreaths, the dusty angel figurines from the attic, and bake pecan pies that filled the house with the kind of smell that made you feel like you belonged somewhere. My late husband, Thomas, used to say I turned December into magic, but that was back when the family still felt like a family. Things started to shift after Thomas passed. It was like the glue that held everything in place dissolved the moment I lowered him into the ground. But I still tried. I cooked. I cleaned. I made phone calls. I sent cards. I stitched Christmas stockings for the grandkids with shaking hands and failing eyesight. I did all the things a mother and grandmother should. I never asked for anything. Not a dime, not even a thank you. All I wanted was togetherness, warmth, the illusion that nothing had changed. But illusions have their way of cracking, especially under the weight of pride. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this part of the story resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of Lucille's powerful journey. My son Charles married Sandra 8 years ago, and I knew from the moment she walked into our lives with her designer purse and eyes that never quite met mine, that she didn't see me as someone worth respecting. She smiled when Charles looked, but when he turned away, that smile dropped like a curtain. She wasn't from Shreveport, she was from Houston. Big city attitude, polished, loud, and above all, cold. I tried. Lord knows I tried. I welcomed her. I complimented her hair, her nails, her career. I invited her to join me in the kitchen, to sit beside me on the porch swing. But she declined, every single time, with a polite excuse or a dismissive wave. I told myself, Lucille, give it time. She'll warm up. Maybe she's just not used to people like you. But years passed, and that warmth never came. Instead, what grew was distance, then contempt. That Christmas morning, the one that changed everything, I had woken up early to prepare the house. The windows sparkled from the cleaning I did the day before. The tree stood proud, a 7-foot pine from the farmer's market, decorated with decades of memories. Ornaments from when Charles was a boy, hand-painted bells from our first Christmas with Thomas. Even a crocheted angel made by my own mama, now yellowed with age. The table was set for 12. There was turkey roasting, 3 pies on the windowsill, and soft jazz playing on the old radio in the kitchen. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought. When Charles and Sandra arrived, something was different. She was dressed to the nines. Red stilettos, a dress that looked more like a runway piece than something you'd wear to Grandma's house. Her makeup was immaculate, but her eyes carried a storm. And Charles, he seemed anxious, fidgety, the kind of nervous that told me he already knew something was about to go wrong. Lucille, she said, air kissing my cheek. How festive. I should have known then. As the family arrived one by one, the room filled with chatter and laughter. For a while, I let myself believe it would be okay, that maybe this year, for just one night, we could all be a family again. But Sandra had other plans. It started subtly, comments under her breath, little jabs dressed in smiles. This gravy tastes traditional, she said, placing her spoon down. When I offered her a slice of pie, she laughed and said, Oh, I try to avoid anything that tastes like the 50s. At one point, when I complimented her earrings, she turned to her sister-in-law and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, Charles always said his mom had a thing for tacky jewelry. There it was, the shift in the room. My other daughter-in-law looked down. One of my grandkids snickered. My hands began to shake. Still, I didn't react. Not yet. But then came the moment, the one that lit the fuse. We were all gathered around the living room, opening gifts. Each family took turns handing out their presents. I had wrapped mine with gold paper and velvet ribbon, placed name tags in cursive. When it was my turn, I handed Sandra a small box. Inside was a brooch, a vintage piece from my own mother, shaped like a dove. I had saved it for the daughter I never had. She opened it, stared for a moment, then held it up for everyone to see and said with a laugh, "Oh, wow, a pin? Is this from a museum?" Laughter. Light. Awkward laughter. The kind that cuts deeper than silence. Charles looked away. No one defended me. Not a soul. And that was it. That was the moment the woman in me stood up inside the old lady everyone thought they knew. I smiled, quietly, calmly, and said, "I suppose you won't need to keep it then." Sandra shrugged. "It's sweet, but not really my taste." I nodded. Noted. That night, after everyone had left, I sat in my armchair and stared at the empty room, the wrapping paper strewn on the floor, the wine glasses still half full, the silence of a house that once echoed with joy. And I made a decision. A quiet, deliberate, final decision. I would erase her, not from memory, but from everything that mattered. My will, the family Bible where I had written down each marriage, birth, and name, the photo albums, the gifts, the traditions. I would write her out like a chapter I regretted keeping. She had mocked me, humiliated me in my own home, on Christmas of all days. But I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't confront. I wouldn't stoop. I would erase. And oh, how deeply she would feel it when the time came. Because I am Lucille Hargrove. I have lived through war, loss, poverty, and death. But nothing taught me more than motherhood. And nothing has ever been more dangerous than a mother who's done being silent. The next morning, the air was still thick with the scent of cinnamon and regret. My slippers made no sound on the old hardwood floors as I moved through the house, cleaning up what remained of Christmas. Crumpled wrapping paper, a forgotten mitten under the sofa, an untouched plate of cookies near the fireplace. It was strange how quickly the room returned to silence, how fast the joy evaporated when those who pretended to care were gone. I moved slowly, not from age, but from weight, the weight of what I had decided. It wasn't just a reaction. It wasn't bitterness or pettiness. It was a reckoning, and it had been a long time coming. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat at the table, pulling out my red leather journal, the one where I kept everything important. It held birth dates, anniversaries, recipes passed down through generations, even the passwords to my email and bank account. My hand trembled just slightly as I flipped to the page labeled Will and Testament, Last Revisions. But it was all still there. Charles as executor, equal shares for him and his brother Daniel, college funds for the grandkids, and a special notation that my mother's jewelry, including the dove brooch, would go to my cherished daughter-in-law, Sandra Hargrove. I crossed that sentence out with a heavy black pen. Then I crossed out her name from every other place it appeared. I didn't stop there. I picked up the family photo on the bookshelf, the one from last Thanksgiving, and used a pair of scissors to trim around her face. Snip. Just like that, she was gone. It felt odd, doing something so drastic with such calm. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. It was something else entirely. A strange peace. Like I had been holding my breath for years and had finally exhaled. A few days later, Charles called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mama," he said. His voice was polite, hesitant. "Hey, baby," I replied, masking my emotions with the softness only a mother can summon. "How's everything?" He paused. "Good. Just wanted to say thank you again for Christmas. Sorry Sandra made those comments. She has a weird sense of humor. A weird sense of humor. That's what he called it. Not cruelty, not disrespect, just humor." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. "It was a lovely gathering," I said. "You two take care." He waited, maybe hoping for more, but I ended the call. In the days that followed, I began to remove her in more ways. I rewrote the letter I planned to leave behind when my time came. I boxed up every gift she had ever given me. I pulled down the Christmas card from their family and tossed it into the fire. But this wasn't about revenge in the way movies tell it. I wasn't plotting to destroy her life. I was simply removing her from mine, quietly, methodically, like someone gently erasing pencil marks from a cherished drawing. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. Sandra was the type who always needed to be at the center. Her presence was like perfume, overpowering and lingering, even after she left the room. It was only a matter of time before she realized something had shifted. It came sooner than I expected. One Sunday afternoon, I was sitting on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea and watching the neighbor's cat sunbathe on my railing, when a sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. Sandra stepped out, dressed like she was heading to a country club rather than an old woman's porch. Her heels clicked on the gravel as she approached, her phone clutched in one manicured hand. "Lucille?" she called, her voice sugary sweet. "Do you have a minute?" I didn't stand. I simply looked at her and gestured to the other end of the swing. She hesitated before sitting, her dress too tight to let her move easily. I could smell the floral notes of her perfume even before the wind carried them. "I just wanted to clear the air," she began. "About Christmas. I know you're a bit sensitive. I didn't mean anything by what I said. You know me. I joke. It's how I lighten things up." I watched her face carefully. She was expecting forgiveness. Expecting the old woman to smile, to wave it off, to say it was all fine. But I didn't. "Do you think it's funny," I said slowly, "to mock someone who's welcomed you into their home? To laugh at something that belonged to my mother, handed to me in her dying days and offered to you as a gesture of family?" She blinked. "Lucille, it was a pin. It was history," I replied. "It was trust. It was the last piece of a legacy that survived slavery, war, and poverty. And you laughed." She looked away for a second, then straightened. "Okay, maybe it wasn't my best moment, but you're being dramatic." I apologized. I leaned in just a bit. "You didn't apologize. You explained. There's a difference." She stood abruptly, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, I came here to make peace. If you want to hold on to grudges, that's on you." I smiled for the first time. "No grudges, Sandra. I just don't want you in my life anymore. Not in my home, not in my memories, not in my will." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she turned, heels clicking again, and marched back to the SUV. It peeled out of the driveway faster than necessary. That evening, I sat by the window and stared out at the stars. I felt no regret, not even a hint, but I did feel something unexpected. Relief, a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I had tried to make everyone happy. I had swallowed disrespect for the sake of peace. But peace that comes from silence isn't peace. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. A few weeks passed. Then came the church potluck, a long-standing tradition where I brought my famous gumbo and everyone exchanged gossip between bites of cornbread. I hadn't planned on going, but something inside me urged me to show up, to be seen, to exist loudly. When I walked in wearing my blue Sunday dress and the brooch Sandra had ridiculed, yes, I had taken it back out of the box, I felt eyes turn toward me. Miss Gladys waved me over. Pastor Thomas complimented my cooking. I laughed, louder than I had in years. And when someone asked about Charles and Sandra, I simply said, "They're doing well, I suppose," and changed the subject. Because that's what Sandra hated the most, being ignored. Back home, I resumed writing letters to old friends. I dusted off the piano. I even started a scrapbook of family memories, one in which Sandra's name never appeared. It was as though I had edited my past and preserved only what brought me warmth. But I knew this wasn't the end. A woman like Sandra doesn't walk away quietly. I was ready for the storm, and I was no longer afraid. 2 months passed. Winter turned to early spring in Shreveport, the kind where the air still carried a bite, but the camellias outside my window began to bloom again. My mornings were quiet, simple. I'd sit on the porch with a wool shawl wrapped around my shoulders, sip my chicory coffee, and read the newspaper front to back. I even started writing letters again, not emails, but real letters, with envelopes and stamps. One to my cousin Mavis in Baton Rouge, one to Miss Ellen, who moved to Ohio but never forgot my birthday. I filled my days with small joys. I even signed up to teach quilting every Thursday down at the community center. Life was moving forward. At least I thought it was. It started with a knock on the door, not hurried, not frantic, just a slow, deliberate rhythm. I opened it to find Charles standing there, alone. He looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from something deeper, the kind of weariness that settles behind a man's eyes when the people he loves are at odds and he doesn't know how to fix it. "Can I come in, Mama?" he asked, voice low. I stepped aside. "Of course you can." He sat at the kitchen table, same chair he always picked, the one closest to the window. I poured him a cup of coffee and placed it in front of him, then sat across with my hands folded. "I need to talk to you," he said. "About Sandra." I nodded but didn't speak. I let him find his words. "She's been upset," he started. "Really upset. She told me about your conversation, how you said she was removed from your will, how you're erasing her from everything." "She told you that?" I asked, tilting my head. He hesitated. "She was crying." "Charles," I said calmly, "you've been married to her 8 years. Have you ever seen her cry about anyone else's pain but her own?" That hit him. I saw it. A flicker across his face. A recognition he didn't want to admit. "She feels disrespected," he said. "And I felt humiliated," I replied. "The difference is I was silent for years. She couldn't stand 2 minutes of accountability." He rubbed his temples. "I'm not saying you're wrong, Mama. I feel stuck in the middle." "That's because you are," I said gently. "But you shouldn't be. You're my son, and you're her husband. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking you to recognize truth." He looked down at the table. "I just want peace." "Peace," I repeated. "It's a beautiful thing. But sometimes, Charles, peace doesn't come from pretending nothing happened. Sometimes it only comes after truth has had its say." He didn't reply. He just sat there, letting the silence speak for him. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "I love you," I said, "but I will not let anyone treat me like I'm disposable. Not even the woman you married." He nodded slowly, eyes misty. "I know, Mama. I know." When he left, I didn't feel angry. I felt steady, resolved. I had told him the truth, not to hurt him, but to free myself. And I think, somewhere deep down, he understood. But I also knew Sandra wouldn't leave it there. Her pride wouldn't allow it. It was a Saturday when the letter came. Not a handwritten note. A formal envelope, thick stock, with a gold monogram on the back, SH. Inside was an invitation, fancy font, heavy ink, a celebration of Sandra's new business launch, some boutique lifestyle brand with her name splashed all over it. The event was being hosted at the local art gallery, black tie only. At the bottom of the invitation, written in small but pointed cursive, family members expected. RSVP by March 15th. Expected. I laughed out loud. It was a move straight out of her playbook. Appear gracious, inclusive, performative. Act like nothing was wrong so that, when people noticed the tension, she could play the victim and say, "I invited her. She just didn't want to be part of the family." She knew I wouldn't go, but I went. Oh, I went. Not out of pettiness. Not to make a scene, but because I wanted her to see the face of the woman she thought she could belittle. I wore a navy blue dress, the one I had worn to my church's centennial banquet. I styled my hair in soft curls and pinned that same brooch to my shoulder. I walked into that art gallery alone, heels clicking against the marble floors, and smiled at every person I passed. Sandra saw me within minutes. Her eyes widened. She was standing near a champagne tower, laughing with a group of young women in pastel dresses. When she caught sight of me, her smile froze. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, like a true performer, she approached me, arms open. "Lucille," she said with false warmth, "I didn't think you'd come." "I'm full of surprises," I replied, voice cool as the wine in her hand. People were watching, whispering. She knew it. So did I. She leaned in slightly and whispered, "This isn't the place, Lucille." "I agree," I whispered back. "But you made the place. You mailed the invitation. You wanted an audience. Now you have one." She stepped back, forcing a smile. "Enjoy the evening." I did. I spoke with people. I complimented artwork. I congratulated her on the launch with a grace that confused even her closest friends. But my presence alone was the strike. I didn't need to raise my voice or throw a drink. I simply existed, boldly, unapologetically, in a space she had designed to make herself look good. That was when I realized something powerful. Sandra didn't fear my anger. She feared my dignity. She feared the strength of someone who didn't play her game, who stood calm and unmoved in a world built on performance and image. After that night, the calls stopped. The texts stopped. Charles came around less. Birthdays were skipped. Holidays became quieter. But my soul was louder. My laughter came easier. My nights were more peaceful. I baked more. I read more. I sang hymns as I cleaned the house and started a journal I titled, After the Silence. People asked what had happened. At church, at the store, even at the quilting group. I never badmouthed her. I simply said, some people love the stage more than the story, and I was tired of being the prop. They understood. Women my age know. We know what it means to swallow hurt, to keep the family together at the expense of our own hearts, to be told that strength looks like silence, and respect means shrinking. But I had learned something else. Strength is truth, spoken softly, but without apology. And sometimes vengeance doesn't come with fire. It comes with grace. It comes with showing up. It comes with erasing, not to destroy, but to reclaim. And I wasn't done reclaiming yet. The first spring without Sandra in my life felt different, like waking up in a house where the windows had finally been opened after a long, stale winter. The air smelled of azaleas, fresh earth, and that particular southern scent that only comes with April rain. My home, though quieter than it used to be, had a stillness that wasn't empty. It was earned. A silence that wrapped around me like a quilt passed down through generations, stitched not with thread, but with resilience. I wasn't angry anymore. Not like I had been that Christmas, or even at the gallery. Something inside me had shifted, and it wasn't just age or time. It was something stronger. The part of me that had once clung to family, no matter how badly it cut, had finally learned to let go. Not with violence, not with hatred, just with clarity. I began pouring my energy into the parts of my life that had been neglected while I was trying to hold everything together. I joined a book club, even if my eyes didn't read as fast as they used to. I started a garden in my backyard. Red tomatoes, bell peppers, and basil, so fresh I could smell it from my kitchen window. The dirt under my nails became a reminder that I was still building, still growing, still alive. And I started teaching. Every Thursday morning, I made my way to the community center, a little canvas tote on my arm, filled with fabric scraps and chalk pencils. The quilting class wasn't big, just 8 women, mostly my age, though a few younger women had started joining. One, in particular, caught my eye. Her name was Keisha, 29, soft-spoken, newly divorced. She'd sit near me every week, quiet at first, fumbling through her stitches, sighing in frustration. I just can't seem to get it right, she whispered one morning, tearing a thread loose for the 3rd time. You're trying too hard to be perfect, I told her, watching her fingers tremble. Quilting ain't about perfection. It's about persistence. You stitch, you rip, you stitch again. That's life. She looked at me, eyes full of something deeper than frustration. What if I don't know what I'm making yet? I smiled. None of us do. We just keep sewing until the pattern reveals itself. Those mornings became the highlight of my week. We'd share stories as we stitched, laughing, sometimes crying. One woman had lost her daughter to cancer. Another had left a marriage after 30 years. Each thread we laid was tied to something more than fabric. It was tied to survival. I began to write about those women, not for a book, not for the world, just for myself. I filled pages and pages with their stories, and my own, weaving us together in the same way our quilts came to life, slowly, imperfectly, but with purpose. One afternoon, as I sat under the pecan tree in my backyard, sorting buttons into old mason jars, a neighbor stopped by. Mrs. Carter, 3 houses down. She carried a small basket of muffins and a nervous look. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, adjusting her sun hat. Not at all, I replied, waving her to the other chair. She sat down, placing the basket on the table. I heard about what happened with your daughter-in-law. I raised my eyebrow but said nothing. She fidgeted. I just wanted to say, It's brave, what you did. Standing your ground like that. Most women I know would have just swallowed it and smiled. I did, I said. For years. But eventually, you choke. She nodded slowly. Well, I admire you. We all do. That night, I cried. Not out of sadness, but from something I couldn't name at first. Then I realized it was validation. It wasn't the same as forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was a quiet acknowledgement that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy, that other women had seen what I saw, had felt what I felt, and understood why I did what I did. Still, the ache lingered. Charles hadn't called in weeks. Birthdays came and went. I sent cards to the grandkids, never knowing if they received them. I left voicemails short and soft, telling them Grandma loved them. I didn't expect a call back. I just needed them to know the door was still open. For them, not for her. And then, one morning in late May, the doorbell rang. It was Charles. No warning, no call. Just him, standing on my porch in a wrinkled shirt, holding a box. I need to talk to you, he said, voice flat. I opened the screen door and stepped aside. He placed the box on my kitchen table. She left. I blinked. What? Sandra. She left. 2 weeks ago. She said she was tired of pretending, tired of the pressure. She said I let you treat her like she didn't belong, and she was done trying. I sat slowly. He ran a hand through his hair. But that's not the whole story. I think she always wanted a reason to leave. She just needed a villain. And you were convenient. I stared at the box. What's in there? He opened it. Inside were photo albums. My albums. Ones that had disappeared years ago. Ones I thought were misplaced during the move Charles made when he and Sandra bought their new house. But they weren't misplaced. She had taken them. Why bring these now? I asked. Because I'm tired too, he said. Tired of pretending she was ever going to love this family the way we do. Tired of watching her turn everything into a performance. I defended her because I thought that's what husbands do. But maybe what husbands should do is protect what's right. And I let her walk all over you. He sat across from me, eyes red. I'm sorry, Mama. That was the moment something cracked. Years of tightness in my chest gave way. Not everything was healed. Far from it. But something had started to mend. Did she take the kids? I asked. They're with me now. For the summer, at least. I nodded. Bring them by sometime. He smiled for the first time in a long while. They'd like that. After he left, I opened the albums. Pictures of Charles in overalls, holding frogs in the backyard. Pictures of Daniel's high school graduation. Photos of Thomas asleep on the couch, a book half open on his chest. And in the middle, a photo I hadn't seen in years. Me and Charles at his wedding, before the ceremony. Just the two of us. I was fixing his bow tie. He was looking at me, proud and nervous. And I looked strong, not tired, not worn down. Strong. That was the woman Sandra tried to erase. And that was the woman who had returned. I wasn't the same Lucille anymore. I was something more. Not because of the pain, but because of what I had chosen to do with it. And the best part? I still had more to write. The first time I saw my grandchildren again, it was a Wednesday afternoon. The sun was high over Shreveport, beating down on the cracked sidewalks and rustling the magnolia trees that lined my street. I had baked a pecan pie that morning, even though my knees complained more than usual. There was something different about the way I moved that day, something lighter. The house wasn't just clean, it was prepared. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon drifted through the rooms like a memory coming back to visit. When the knock came, I opened the door to find Charles standing there, 2 kids at his side, Emma, 8 years old, and Tyler, 6. They looked up at me, unsure at first. I don't know what Sandra had told them in the time between holidays and silence, but I could see the hesitation in their eyes. I crouched slowly, ignoring the protest in my joints, and opened my arms. They didn't run, not immediately, but Emma stepped forward, then Tyler followed. And when they hugged me, tight, hesitant at first but growing stronger, I knew some part of me had come back to life. I buried my face in Emma's hair and whispered, "Grandma missed you something fierce." Tyler said, "Did you bake pie?" And I laughed for the first time that day. We sat in the kitchen like old times. Emma helped me serve the whipped cream. Tyler spilled a little on his shirt, and Charles tried to dab it clean while I waved him off. "Let him be a boy," I said. "They're washable." It was ordinary, and in that ordinariness I felt the deepest kind of joy. Not loud, not triumphant, just whole. The days turned into weeks. Charles brought them every Saturday. Sometimes he stayed, sometimes he didn't. But the children stayed longer each visit. They asked me questions. Tyler wanted to know why my walls had so many pictures. Emma begged me to show her how to sew a button. One afternoon, they both helped me in the garden, getting dirt under their fingernails and smiling like they had been born for it. The silence that once haunted my home had been replaced by laughter and footsteps and small voices calling, "Grandma, look." But peace, as I've come to understand, always invites a test. It came 3 weeks later in the form of a lawyer. A crisp white envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just a name at the bottom, Sandra Hargrove. I sat on the porch and opened it carefully, my hands steady as stone. Inside was a letter, typed, formal. She was suing for visitation rights. She was claiming I was alienating the children, that my influence was damaging, that I had created emotional distress within the family unit. She even claimed I had spoken ill of her in front of the kids. I stared at the words, letting them burn into me. There were no tears, no gasps, just the sharp snap of a door I thought I had closed, swinging back open. Charles was livid when I showed him. "She's insane," he muttered, pacing my kitchen. "She hasn't even asked to see them since she left. But she doesn't care about seeing them," I said calmly. "She cares about control." He nodded, clenching his jaw. "She's scared." "Of what?" I asked. "Of fading," he said. "Of not mattering." That's when I understood. All this, her mockery, her cruelty, her lawsuit, wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about her own reflection. She needed to feel powerful, and nothing terrified her more than the thought of being irrelevant in a world she couldn't manipulate. I could have fought it in court, hired a lawyer, gathered letters from teachers, neighbors, friends, but I didn't. Instead, I invited her to my house. One last time. It was a risk, yes, but it wasn't fear that guided me. It was the certainty that I was no longer playing defense. Charles didn't like the idea. "She's going to twist everything you say," he warned. "You don't owe her anything." "No," I replied, "but I owe myself peace." When Sandra arrived, she looked different. Tired, thinner. Her hair was pulled back, face pale under a layer of makeup that couldn't hide the cracks. She stepped onto my porch like it was unfamiliar territory, like the ground might give way. I opened the door before she could knock. "Come in." She hesitated, then stepped inside. Her heels clicked across the floor like before, but softer now. She didn't bring a purse, just a file folder clutched in one hand. I gestured to the chair across from mine in the parlor. She sat, legs crossed, the folder placed on her lap. "You read the letter?" she began. "I did. I meant every word." "I know." A silence passed. She shifted. "I'm not here to apologize. I didn't think you were. But I am here to offer a deal." I raised an eyebrow. "You came to bargain?" She opened the folder. "I'll drop the visitation claim. No court, no lawyers. You can have your Saturdays, your garden parties, your sewing lessons. I won't interfere. But you—" She paused, locking eyes with me. "You will remove your edits to the will. You'll restore what you erased." My breath didn't catch. My hands didn't flinch. "You're asking me to undo the one decision that gave me back my dignity. I'm asking you to be fair." "Fair," I repeated. "After you humiliated me, laughed in my face, stole my memories, called my grief nostalgia and my love tacky. You want fair now?" Her face hardened. "You think this is just about you, Lucille? You think you're the only one who's been hurt?" "No," I said, standing. "But I'm the only one who stopped pretending." I walked to the mantel and picked up a small frame. A photo of my mother holding me as a child, both of us laughing, barefoot in a garden. I placed it on the table between us. "My mother taught me the value of silence," I said, "but she also taught me when to break it. I'm not erasing you out of cruelty. I'm erasing you because you erased me first. In every dinner, every birthday, Every sigh and eye roll. I became invisible. Until I decided I didn't want to be. Sandra didn't speak. She just stared at the picture. Then, without a word, she closed the folder, stood, and walked to the door. But just before stepping out, she looked over her shoulder and said, "You'll regret this." I smiled, soft and slow. "No, dear. I regret not doing it sooner." When she left, the air felt lighter again, like a window had opened where a wall once stood. Charles called the next day. She dropped the claim. I said nothing for a moment. Then I whispered, "Good." The following Saturday, I sat with Emma and Tyler under the pecan tree, teaching them how to shell the nuts without cracking them in half. Emma was getting better. Tyler gave up halfway and went to chase a squirrel. Charles watched from the porch, arms folded, a faint smile on his lips. "You're different," he said. "I finally remembered who I was," I replied. And I had. Not just a mother, not just a widow, not just someone's target. I was Lucille Hargrove, and I had taken my story back. By the time summer settled over Shreveport like a heavy quilt, I had learned to sleep again. Real sleep. The kind that doesn't end in startled awakenings or the echo of old conversations playing on repeat in your mind. My home felt like mine again. Quiet, yes, but not hollow. Each room breathed with memory and meaning. The clock in the hallway ticked with a rhythm that no longer reminded me of what had been lost, but of what I had reclaimed. I had endured enough winters to know that some seasons are for shedding, others for blooming. This was a season of becoming. The fallout from Sandra's departure didn't ripple through the family the way I'd expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no whispered accusations, just absence. A quiet pulling away, the kind that reveals who was there for the family and who was there for the spotlight. Charles kept coming by. The kids, too. They started calling me just to talk. Emma told me about her favorite teacher. Tyler showed me the drawing he made of our garden. It looked like a mess of scribbles to anyone else, but I could see my pecan tree in it clear as day. Even Daniel, my youngest, who had always kept a cautious distance, called one evening from Atlanta. He said he'd heard some of the story from Charles and wanted to check in. He was gentle, thoughtful, careful not to step on any old wounds, but his voice held something new, respect. Maybe he realized that the woman he once called dramatic had simply reached her edge. One afternoon, I decided to visit the lawyer's office downtown. Mr. Collins was in his 60s, slow with paperwork but sharp with words. He'd handled my estate documents for years. "I want to make it official," I told him, placing my will on his desk. "I'm not changing anything back." He looked over the papers, then at me. "You sure, Lucille?" "As sure as the sun rises." He nodded and went to work. And as I watched him, I felt the weight of something leave my shoulders. That last, lingering thread of doubt, fear, guilt. It unraveled right there between legal clauses and signatures. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was documenting it, etching it into record. That mattered more than I ever thought it would. That evening, I found myself on the porch again, watching fireflies dance near the edge of the garden. I held a letter in my lap, one I had written weeks ago but hadn't mailed. It was addressed to Sandra. I hadn't written it out of spite or even anger. I had written it because I needed to, because sometimes the best way to silence someone's shadow is to speak your final truth and set it free. In it, I told her what she had taken from me, the small indignities, the dismissals, the sharp words said under the guise of humor, but I also told her what she had given me without meaning to: strength, clarity, a spine I thought I had lost under decades of trying to keep the peace. "I won't be part of your story anymore," the letter ended, "but you will always be part of mine. Not because I want you to be, but because your absence taught me how to return to myself." I didn't mail it. I burned it. And as the paper curled and blackened in the old metal basin beside the porch, I watched the smoke drift up into the twilight sky. I whispered a prayer, not for her, but for myself. A prayer of thanks. For survival. For rediscovery. For every piece of myself I had sewn back together, stitch by stubborn stitch. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at the community center. They were starting a new series, Stories of Strength. Miss Carla, the coordinator, said my name was the first to come up. I laughed when she told me. "Me?" I said. I'm just an old woman who teaches quilting and talks to her tomato plants. No, she replied. You're a woman who reminded us that silence isn't always golden. Sometimes, it's just the sound of someone losing themselves. I agreed to speak, not because I craved attention, but because I had something to say, and because somewhere in that room, I knew there'd be another woman on the edge of her own silence, waiting for someone to tell her she had permission to break it. The day of the talk, I wore a soft lavender dress, the brooch once again pinned just below my shoulder. I stepped up to the microphone with a calm heart and steady voice. My name is Lucille Hargrove, I began. I'm 75 years old, and I spent a long time believing that love meant enduring anything for the sake of family. I paused. Let the room breathe with me. But love doesn't mean allowing yourself to disappear. It doesn't mean biting your tongue until it bleeds. Real love, the kind that leaves something behind, is built on mutual respect. And when that disappears, what you're left with isn't love, it's performance. I told them my story, not all the details. Some pain belongs only to the soul who lived it, but enough to show the shape of it, enough for the women in that room to recognize themselves in my voice. When I finished, the applause didn't come in a burst. It came slowly, softly, like rain on a roof, and then it grew, not loud, but long and warm. A standing ovation, not for theatrics, but for truth. Afterwards, a woman no younger than 50 walked up to me, eyes glistening. She didn't speak right away. She just took my hand. Thank you, she whispered. I thought I was the only one. You never are, I said. Not really. In the weeks that followed, I received letters from women I'd never met. Some from the quilting group, some from church. One even came from a woman in Texas who had seen a clip of my speech online. They all said the same thing, in different words. You gave me the courage to choose myself. It's funny how life works. You spend decades trying to blend in, trying not to ruffle feathers, thinking your quiet suffering is the cost of keeping things together. Then one day, you speak, and realize the whole world was waiting for you to open your mouth. I never got another letter from Sandra. Never saw her again. Word around town said she moved to Austin, started dating some real estate man. I don't know if she remarried. I don't care. What mattered was that her name was no longer on my lips, or my papers, or my conscience. And Charles? He grew into a man I was proud of again. He learned to speak up, to listen, to stop apologizing for making the right choice. Our relationship deepened in ways I didn't think possible. Not perfect, but real. As for Emma and Tyler, they became my little shadows. Summers in my garden, sleepovers filled with stories and sweet tea. And one evening, while watching the stars with Emma on a blanket in the yard, she turned to me and said, Grandma, do you believe people can grow even when they're old? I smiled, kissed the top of her head. That's the only time it really matters. 3 years have passed since that Christmas. 3 quiet, beautiful, fully lived years. The kind of years that don't make headlines, but shape the soul. They didn't come with grand announcements or sudden turns. They came slowly, gently, like morning light through lace curtains. And maybe that's the greatest blessing of all. Not some dramatic redemption, not even justice that screams down the hall, but the kind of peace that settles in and stays. Life didn't rush me after everything. It let me heal in my own time. Let me rediscover the shape of my days without pressure to become anything but myself. At 78 now, I'm slower getting out of bed. The bones don't move like they used to. But my spirit, that's stronger than ever. Because every morning I open my eyes and know I am no longer invisible. Emma is 11 now. A little taller, a little bolder. She's got a streak of independence that reminds me so much of myself at her age. She started writing poetry too. Tiny poems in a leather notebook I gave her last Christmas. She brings them over and reads them to me like they're secrets, sacred and soft. And I listen with both ears and my whole heart, because I know how hard it is to have something to say in a world that teaches girls to whisper. Tyler's 9, wild as ever, lost his 2 front teeth last fall and still grins like he's proud of it. He spends most of our afternoons outside, climbing trees and chasing lizards. Sometimes he talks about his mama, Sandra, but not much. Just enough to tell me she calls every now and then, sends a gift on birthdays, no visits, no letters. I never ask questions. I just listen, because I know the day will come when they both want to understand the truth, and when it does, I'll be ready to give them the version that holds both honesty and grace. Charles. He changed too. He's still the man who once tried to balance between the women he loved, but now he understands what balance really means. Not silence, not sacrifice, but strength. He's remarried, a good woman this time. Her name is Renee, soft-spoken, kind, curious. She came into the family like a breeze, not a storm, and for the first time in a long time, my son smiles like he isn't bracing for something. Renee and I bake together sometimes. She helps me reach the high cabinets when my shoulders ache. She asks me questions about Thomas, about how I met him, about how we built a life out of nothing but hard work and faith. And I tell her everything, not just because she asks, but because she listens without judgment. That's all I ever wanted from Sandra, and never once received. The quilting class at the community center is still going strong. We've grown from 8 to almost 30 women. I only teach once a month now. These old hands need their rest. But I never miss a session. We've started calling it the Threaded Circle. And it's more than sewing now. It's a place where women come to remember who they are. Widows, daughters, survivors, dreamers. We stitch fabric, yes. But we also stitch broken pieces of ourselves back together. We talk about marriage, grief, growing old. We cry. We laugh. We heal. Keisha, the young woman from before, she teaches now. She took over the weekly sessions when I stepped back. She's thriving, built her own Etsy store, sells baby blankets and wall hangings with scripture sewn in gold thread. She still calls me Miss Lucille, though I've told her she doesn't have to. I like it anyway. It reminds me that age doesn't mean fading. It means mentoring, passing the needle forward. Sometimes I think back to the version of me that sat alone after that Christmas. The woman who stared at a table full of empty plates and felt like her presence had expired. And I want to wrap her in the biggest quilt I've ever made. I want to whisper to her that the silence wasn't the end, that it was the beginning, that choosing herself wasn't a betrayal of family, but a defense of the very love she spent her life trying to give, because that's what people forget. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. It's saying, the love I give to others, I also deserve to receive. It's saying, I will no longer applaud those who mock me. It's saying, my story matters. Sandra never came back. Not to Shreveport, not to Charles, not to the children, and I stopped waiting for her to. Sometimes in the quiet of night, I wonder where she is, if she changed, if she ever looks back and wishes she'd done things differently, but I never linger on those thoughts for long, because this isn't her story. Not anymore. It's mine, and I made it beautiful. I printed out a new version of my will this year, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I included a letter inside, handwritten, signed, and sealed, for Emma and Tyler. In it, I told them everything I wanted them to know when I'm gone, that their worth is not dependent on anyone's approval, that silence should never be mistaken for peace, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who refuses to see your value, and that I loved them, fully, fiercely, freely. I placed the letter in a tin box with a photo of me and them in the garden. They don't know it yet, but one day, when they need it most, they'll find it. And they'll know exactly who they came from. I also included a small piece of fabric, faded pink, with blue daisies. It came from the first quilt I ever made with my mother, a reminder that every generation carries a thread from the last, that every stitch tells a story, that they're not just inheriting things, they're inheriting truth. The garden in the back has grown wild. I let it. The tomatoes spread past the beds. The basil went to seed. The pecan tree is taller than ever, casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Sometimes I sit beneath it in my rocking chair, book in hand. But more often than not, I just watch the sky. Watch the clouds drift past like thoughts I don't have to chase anymore. Peace is not a thunderclap. It's a quiet decision you make every day. To keep going, to keep growing, to keep choosing yourself. And I choose me now. Every morning, every evening, every breath. If someone had told me years ago that I'd find this kind of freedom so late in life, I wouldn't have believed them. I thought all the big chapters were over. I thought I had finished writing. But sometimes, the most powerful story comes not from the beginning or the middle, but from the courage to write one last chapter differently. And that's exactly what I did. My name is Lucille Hargrove. I'm 78 years old. I was mocked, overlooked, erased. And still, I rose. I stitched myself back together, thread by thread, memory by memory. And when the time comes for someone to tell my story, I hope they say this: she didn't just survive. She reclaimed her name, her place, her peace. And in doing so, she became unforgettable. Have you ever had to remove someone from your life, not out of hate, but to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments. If Lucille's journey moved you, please like and subscribe to follow more powerful stories of strength, boundaries, and healing. Send this to someone who might need the courage to speak up for themselves. And remember, dignity isn't given, it's claimed. You are allowed to take your power back, no matter your age, your title, or your history. Thank you for listening to my story.